Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disasters, business continuity, resilience, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. As you can tell, today is another great session. I'd like to welcome back for the first episode of 2026, Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back and Happy New Year.
Hey, we can still say that because it is January
Yep.
still, right? So happy New Year to you, Alex. And it's a delight as always to be with you.
And you are my first guest, first recording of the new year.
Yay!
I think we're up pushing 60 episodes, so it's only fair that you be the first one this year.
Yay, I'm excited. I'm excited.
Now, I know the last, I don't know, half dozen episodes, we've been kind of going back and forth on things. So, what is it you would like to get started and talk about today?
Well, I have two things that are on my list of things that actually impact resiliency in a significant way, I should say. The first one is I'd like to briefly talk about, and we'll weave this into our conversation today, the global risk report that the World Economic Forum publishes every year and has a lot of information that we should be aware of. And then secondarily, I just like to talk a little bit about the forum at Davos. Those are my two things.
Well, why don't
Any
we start on
thoughts?
the first one, the risk report? I've downloaded a copy, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
I know it's a lot actually. This is actually, pardon me, a really important report, and I find that most of the people in our profession either aren't aware of it or don't read it. So it is large and it's free online. So, but why is it important? So that's sort of the question I want people to sort of stop and think about for a moment. This is important because it looks at the globe and it looks at the risks that could impact not only countries but businesses. And so when you think about what we do for a living, resiliency, crisis management, basically figuring how to manage difficult situations, it would be good if we had a really good sense of what some of the smartest people in the world are thinking about as far as what are the kinds of risks that we need to both prepare for, but also we should be expecting. And so I think that's why I like to always talk about this. And I really beg our listeners to really download a copy. So be sure you put a link in the show notes about how to get it because it's free and people should really dig into it. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Great. I think as you were talking, I thought about something from a few years ago with regards to that report. I think some people kind of started to brush that report off to the side when musicians and actors started showing up, and they thought,
Mhm.
"Oh, this isn't as important as it should be."
Yeah,
But it is. It
but
really
it's very
is.
it's very serious. And I think a lot of people like that I've talked to say, "Oh, yeah, I know about it, but I don't look at it." I think it's because they maybe disregard the fact that this global institution is looking at all of these very high level issues, but they are really important. And this actually is prepared every fall, usually around November. And it's actually about 1,500 both scientists, government officials, individuals who are in academia, economists, leaders around the world that actually opine on this. So we're talking about some pretty well educated and people that are, kind of globally savvy.
Yeah.
And and so it actually is also pretty digestible because it actually will break things into categories. But it was really important to sort of look at what the key issues are. And I wanted to spend just a moment just talking about those because they actually are kind of interesting. And you think about what situation we are in right now. It said in the short-term risk, because they define the risks in basically two categories. Short-term, which is over the next 2 years, and 10 years is the other category they really look at. When they looked at what to expect or what the kinds of problems that we would imagine, remember this was actually started and developed in November of last year. But excuse me, the number one issue they recognized was geographical confrontation. geoeconomic confrontation.
Hmm.
The second was mis and disinformation. And the third was societal polarization. So if you stop and just think about those for a moment, the geoeconomic confrontation is what we are seeing, of course, right now happening across the world, really driven by the United States. We most must have the same cold or something, even though you're in Canada and I'm in California. Um, and I think that's an important one to stop and reflect on because many of our listeners might say, okay, I know I get the economic issues, but that really doesn't impact me. And I'd like to peel that back with you to talk about resiliency and what happens when you have geoeconomic confrontations. When countries essentially kind of divorce their friends and or there is political strife between them. And so when you stop and think about that, and I'm going to toss this back to you, when you stop and think about that, and you think about the impact on resiliency, and you look at geoeconomic confrontation, what do you think that means? How do you perceive that?
Well, some of the things that come to mind is with regards to resilience is supply chains and things like that. First of all, that we have things going across the border in both directions all the time. When you are, quote unquote, to use your word, divorcing, shall we
Mhm.
say, or at least a separation, then that means you're not sending things back and forth as much anymore. And
Mhm.
you have to look for other partners.
Mhm.
If I'm sending 10 truckloads of recliners across the border or something, and now they're not accepting any of them, I have to find other markets for those 10 truckloads. And
Mhm.
whether that be the EU or somewhere in Africa or Asia, I have to go there. I have to set up new things.
Right.
And it can give the appearance that well, then it perpetuates some of the thinking. Oh, well, see, you don't need us, or you're walking away from us.
Mhm.
Well, you've already told me you're not accepting my 10 truckloads of couches. What do you
Right.
want me to do?
Right.
I
Right.
can't sit here and do nothing. And then that you go into the tourist realm as well, where, well, if you don't want me and we're separating, I'm obviously not going to go give you my money. I'm
Right.
going to go somewhere else. So then that starts happening.
Mhm.
And when that starts happening, especially along the border communities, um, all along the states and all along Canada, it's on both sides,
Yes.
they're going to suffer because now the people that used to come across all the time to spend on holidays or especially places like Buffalo or Niagara Falls, they're so easy and close to get to. You're not going there for the night out anymore.
Right. Right.
Or you're not coming up to the Canadian side to Toronto.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of concerts that are going on, and there were some people that I know would have gone down to a concert in Cleveland, and they said, "Yeah, but we can't go to the U.S. There's no way we're not taking that chance."
Right.
Because they weren't born here in Canada, so they obviously thought if something happens, we're not going over what a concert. So that means now you've got musicians and concert venues and the restaurants that are around those areas also being impacted.
Hotels
So,
and
if people might turn around and say, oh, but it doesn't impact me, it will. It doesn't mean it's immediate, but it's going
Mhm.
to trickle down to you at some point because the
Mhm.
workers at those restaurants now are not going to have the hours or the sales,
Right. Right. Right.
that go with it.
Right. It is a cascading series of events. And I think I've had clients of mine already tell me that are outside the US that they have vendors that they've used for years that are US vendors, and they're not going to use them anymore. And they are working aggressively right now to try and find other sources so they can be replaced. And I think that was my first, I'd never really thought about that piece, right? I certainly understood, the issues about cross-border related issues or things going back and forth between, like, say, Canada and the US. But it didn't dawn on me that there would be actually other countries around the world that would say, hey, I don't really want to, use a vendor in the US. I want to find another vendor who makes that particular widget. And
Hmm.
so I am increasingly hearing that. So then you think about what's the impact to your business if you're the business selling the widgets. And think about if you're their continuity planner, right? So what does that mean? Does that business constrict? Can it find other markets? Can it replace those things? Um, but also think about the issues related to your supply chain, your resiliency. If you look at, let's say you've got two or three vendors that maybe provide certain products, but now maybe they're not interested any longer in providing products to you.
Hmm.
What do you do? So I would say that all of our colleagues need to really look at their supply chain and their continuity plans right now to begin to think about how does all of this geopolitical issues, just as was foretold in the risk report, these geographical confrontations, how does that impact my work, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there could be contingencies where I'm not going to mention the company, and I don't even know if they still have the facility, but they had a very large um, work area recovery site in New Jersey
Oh,
at
interesting.
one point. And I
Mhm.
know I worked for a couple of clients that would send people down there
Oh, mhm.
at some point. Now, we've had the pandemic and people can work from home, so they may not have to do that anymore. But if you are a Canadian company and you would send people down there,
Mhm.
is that still your contingency now?
Right, right,
You may not have that option available to you anymore, and you can't assume anyone's going to want to go. And the reverse could
right,
be the same too. Because there are some large areas around the Greater Toronto area where people from Buffalo or Cleveland or Chicago may come to Toronto. Well, they may not want to do that now.
right. And what you hit on is a really important thing. So you know how oftentimes companies will make a resiliency plan and they're just think like, oh, everybody's just going to go along.
Yeah,
They're going to go to where I tell them to go because it's their job. But in reality, I think to your point, if somebody would say, okay, now you need to go to Buffalo or now you need to go to Cleveland or something like that, there might be a huge pushback saying, no, I'm not going. And
yeah,
it's not because you want them to, it's because they have other values. And so I think we need to really look at our plans about where our things come from, what our expectations are, because I think things could be very different. And if we're not careful, those plans could get activated and they will fail straight away.
yeah. Yeah, and it's not just what's the here and now, but you've got to have some forward thinking as well.
Absolutely.
Because we both said, it could trickle down to
Yep.
impact you at a later time.
Yep.
So you've actually got to look ahead to see what's out there, what's happening. Could that impact me now?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
with the global changes that are happening. You can't ignore it.
Right, right. And I think, again, looking at supply chain resiliency, I think that needs to be revisited in a significant way and just really, get a spreadsheet. Where are all the vendors? If they're all in the US, that's not going to be an issue. But what if they're in places like Canada or in the EU or other countries? There needs to be a recheck. 'Cause especially if you don't buy from them all the time, maybe it's
Right.
something you only buy periodically, but it's really important in your business, then maybe they're not going to be so welcoming. So I think I would really ask all of our colleagues to really seriously look at supply chain resiliency with a different view than we always have.
Yeah. And if you're a business leader, community leader, you have to see what that impact is on your community. Your businesses now
Right.
are moving, shutting down, or consolidating or dropping service lines altogether because the market is now gone.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to deal with you anymore. So, well, then we're not going to keep making, widgets.
Right, right, right. So I think, and I don't know how most organizations actually deal with their supply chain assessments. My sense is that it's kind of haphazard in a lot of places, but I think this is an opportunity to really say, okay, we need to have an initiative in our business continuity process and our continuity plans, but also kind of overall, what is our strategy for resiliency in the supply chain? And now we need to look at that holistically and really peel it back. And that would be a really important thing, I think, that our colleagues should be focusing on, certainly in this quarter and probably the next as well. And if
Yeah.
things work out well and there's no issues, great. What a good exercise. But the other thing too is I think this gives us an opportunity to be forecasting to our executives that we are paying attention. We're really being
Mhm.
forward thinking. We are thinking also strategically, because I think a lot of our colleagues are just really looking at the tactics. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of people may not be looking at these bigger strategic issues and how that applies to resiliency and how that applies to continuity planning and how that applies to crisis management. And this is an opportunity for our colleagues to really be able to shine, I think, and produce some good thinking, and your executives might go like, "Whoa, yeah, that's good,"
Yeah.
because we're inside the box that we're probably in.
I just want to add that when you are reviewing your list of providers and third parties that are out there, it's not just the product and service, but it's also the knowledge too. You
Mm,
could be working with a vendor and have been working with someone for a very long time.
really
They've
good
got
point.
all the knowledge, and you've worked with them so long, you don't realize
Right.
that if
They
they're
know so
gone,
much
we
about
don't know
you,
how
right?
to do such and such anymore. So
Right.
you also have to look at it that way too. What's the knowledge that's out there that maybe we don't have,
Hmm.
that we've
That's
kind of,
super important.
siphoned off to a vendor or a client or a partner or something? You have to look at it that way too.
Mhm. And if you were to have to onboard another person to replace them, do you have all of that information well cataloged that you could actually do that?
Yeah, agreed.
That's a
On
really
that
good.
note, let's take our first break. We're talking today with Regina Phelps, and we will be right back.